Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Marta Pinho from Amadeus Ventures. Marta, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Of course. Thanks for having me, Nicola. I will try to be brief and guide you through my previous experiences and how I ended up in CVC. So I was born and raised in Portugal, and that's where I started my professional career. Almost right out of college, I joined the financial VC in Portugal called Portugal Ventures, one of the biggest and oldest VCs in Portugal. And I was fortunate enough to join one of the teams in Portugal Ventures that was investing in early stage startups. And so early on in my professional experience, I was covering basically all the stages of the investment funnel, also from deal flow generation, negotiation, closing, portfolio management. And that was an amazing experience for someone so young and so inexperienced. So at Portugal Ventures, I was actually looking and investing in areas such as e-commerce, digital, biotech, energy. So very diverse. We were focused on investing mainly in Portugal. And so we had broad areas of investment. So I was there for 5 years, very intense and enriching experience. And after those 5 years, I was thinking about my next career step. And I was feeling the need or willing to go to the other side of the table. So to join a startup. And while thinking about that, I thought that was probably the right timing for me to fulfill a dream that I had been silencing for a few years. That was to travel long term. I love to travel, super passionate. And I thought, okay, it's the right timing. And I traveled for a year, for around 7 months in Asia and 5 months in South America. And I will not lie, this was especially enriching from a personal point of view and something I will never forget. But I tried to use this chance to also get closer to the local startup ecosystems. And I did this by looking for events every time I would arrive to a new city, what type of events are happening. I was lucky enough that in India, for example, I was able to join a few bigger events like a startup festival in Bangalore, a social entrepreneurship event in Mumbai. So it was also a very good opportunity for me to know how these different countries and cities, how the ecosystem was, and understand a bit the differences. And then after this year, so I came back to the plan, put the plan in action of going to the other side of the table, and I joined a startup, a rocket internet startup. At the time was called Couponation. So it was a marketplace for online accounts and coupons based in Munich, Germany. And they were one of the fastest growing rocket internet companies at the time, but they were looking to start growing inorganically through acquisitions. So they thought good fit with my profile to leverage the skills that I had developed in financial VC and transfer them to the M&A side. And then after I joined a digital group in Germany called Scout24, and I joined specifically the AutoScout24 brand. So it was a leading platform in Europe for secondhand car listings. And how the company was structured was basically divided into dealers and consumer. And I was working on the consumer side, so the ones looking to buy a car. And I joined the company also to work on the M&A activities, leading the M&A activities on the consumer side. And then the role eventually expanded on top of that to other strategic topics within the organization. And so after starting in financial VC, moving to more towards M&A, first in a startup, then into a bigger organization, I come back to the VC world, but this time in the CVC Amadeus. And I think I mentioned this when we first met, that I feel that it's a bit like closing the circle. And I think it's actually a very good fit with my previous experiences and what I had, the skills that I had the chance to develop. And so I work in Amadeus, and maybe for the ones that are not that much into the travel industry, I think it would be helpful to give a brief overview on what Amadeus does. So Amadeus is a technology player in the global travel industry. It started in the late 80s, founded by 4 airlines, Iberia, Air France, Lufthansa, and SAS, in the distribution business, with a global distribution system connecting the travel providers on one side, airlines, hotels, and many others, to travel agencies. And then some years later, Amadeus also got into the IT business. So developing IT solutions for the same players in the travel industry. So if we look at Amadeus today, and I think this is relevant for you to understand a bit who is behind the CVC and what we bring. Today, Amadeus has a global footprint, is present in more than 190 countries. And if we look at our customer base, if we think about airlines, for example, we have more than 400 airlines as customers. We are more than 1 million hotel properties as customers. And so this can be very relevant for a startup willing to come into this industry, address this market. And that's very important for us as a CVC to give you that brief overview. And maybe now getting into the point, Amadeus Ventures, Amadeus Startup Investment Program. So it was founded in 2014 to invest in early stage startups that were sitting at the crossroads of technology and travel. And so as a corporate investor, we have put a strong focus on strategic value. How can we, through this investment, generate strategic value for the corporation and for the startups? Two of the main objectives of Amadeus Ventures today. The first one is to find and invest and next growth opportunity. And so here we're talking about investment opportunities with a very significant market size and where we, Amadeus, can accelerate the growth of that opportunity. So potentially these areas can become a business line of Amadeus in the future. And then the second one is on supporting the ecosystem of partners that are closer to our existing solutions, existing portfolio. And so here we're talking more about investment opportunities or startups that are closer to what Amadeus is doing, where we see immediate collaboration opportunities, learning opportunities, things we can do together.
Very nice. And I would have many places to double click, but it's quite interesting to look at your personal journey because it nearly feels if you were to design a perfect journey into Amadeus Ventures, that's a way.
Was not planned.
I know, yeah, and you can't plan for that, but you do have the love for travel. You did a financial VC beforehand, and pre-seed and seed is very different from M&A, which then you added into your skill set. So let me start with financial VC side, especially on the pre-seed and seed, where you're working with probably most of them are young entrepreneurs and you were very young. What did you find most challenging to support these entrepreneurs, to select them, to support them?
I think it was two things here. Obviously, will not hide the lack of experience I had. I was learning as well. I was obviously having and working closely with the senior members of the team and supported by them. And I think on the other side, the fact that I was not focused in a specific industry like I am today. So it was definitely challenging what we were doing at the time. And I think was very important for me as well. We were having and building a network of experts in various fields that would support us in topics that whenever we would find relevant. And in your question, that when you mentioned that most of them were for sure very young as well, yes, that's true. And that I myself was quite young. And so I'd like to say that we were both learning together. And I think for them to have probably someone that was as eager to learn and to deep dive on those topics, but being supported by this network of experts and by the internal and more senior team, I can see some benefits as well. The time I would have to dedicate to them and the eagerness to find and solve those problems and learn from them as well and together.
Can you talk about your investment approval process in this case and how it's also granular between the first type and the second type?
Yes. That is actually something we changed a few years ago. Ventures was founded in 2014, as I mentioned in the beginning, and a few years after the start of the startup investment program, we did a review on how it went, how was it going, in order to see how can we make the approval process more agile. And up until 2019, all the investment opportunities, we were presenting them to the ExCom, to the executive committee, so CEO and direct reports. And so they were approved by the ExCom. And after 2019, and after reviewing all the kind of performance of ventures, what we realized was that Most of the investment opportunities that we pitched to the ExCom were approved. So we had a very high conversion rate. And the ones that were not approved, they were actually performed very well financially.
Right.
What we proposed, and that what has been implemented since 2000 or early 2020, was to separate a bit the approval processes of these two tracks. So for the growth opportunities, we would still go to the ExCom. And the reason for this is that we're talking about more strategic investment opportunities. Yep. And the type of discussions we would be having when pitching an investment opportunity is precisely the type of discussions that the ExCom values and wants to be part of. And we wouldn't change the approval process for that track. But for the second one, the ecosystem one, instead of going to the ExCom, we would go to the investment committee, which is a level lower governance of the company. And so that we would be able to have a bit more agile process for the second track that is not as relevant for the ExCom to be involved in discussing. And so that's why we have currently these two different approval processes depending on the type of investment.
It's very good. It's actually probably another golden nugget because you want to involve the executive committee whose time is very precious for the strategic. But when it's more on the tactical, that doesn't need them necessarily. So I think you have evolved into a really good granular design. And maybe that's a good question now to ask, which is very open, which is the why of your corporate VC. And here, the last 2 years has been very challenging for the travel industry. Could you maybe point to some examples of how Amadeus Ventures was helpful to guide Amadeus corporations into what type of innovations is important, what kind of mega trends are starting to emerge, which was not obvious beforehand?
Definitely. And good that you ask, because this is actually something that I do not speak enough when presenting or speaking about Amadeus Ventures, which is the learnings piece of the value that we are bringing to the corporation. We are the eyes and ears of the corporation, of the business unit, meeting hundreds of startups every year. And that part of our role and the value that we can add to the organization is connecting all these dots and bringing them the bigger picture of the trends, what's happening outside of Amadeus. And I think that was particularly important during the pandemic, especially the early days. One was trying to understand what was happening, how it was impacting the industry, the players. And I have to say that especially during the early days, my connection level of engagement with the business units increased considerably, not only because of the new startups that we were meeting, but also the startups that we had in our network that were coming back because they had pivoted and were addressing these new challenges and bringing solutions to address these challenges. I remember one of the first ones, and looking back, this one today sounds quite obvious, but the touchless topic, digitizing some of the touch points in the travel industry. And obviously, this was a trend before the pandemic. I had met numerous startups trying to digitize several steps of the traveler journey, namely, for example, in the hotel, the check-in, the checkout. But all of this was accelerated during the pandemic. And you could see this also in the traction that some of the startups were showing. So that was definitely the first one. Then the trend, for example, of travelers looking for the outdoors when they were planning their first trips after those first months. So the outdoor space, so marketplaces for RVs. The number of startups that we saw in this space that we met also increased considerably during the pandemic to address this need from the travelers. And then another example can be, for example, this work from home or work from anywhere trend. And what does this mean for the travel providers in terms of the setup that the traveler is looking for? And even in what regards the business model, we started seeing some startups, some companies, either existing ones or new companies, bringing also different business models. Think about the subscription business model in the hospitality. And so all of this was trends that we could observe from our interactions with startups and that we were sharing with the organization, and that was part of their discussions. But again, this is something that it wasn't a particular event. This is something that we actually do on a recurring basis. Maybe I can deep dive into that if it makes sense to you.
Yes, I want to deep dive on the sharing. It's obvious that you
Mhm.
can observe a lot and you can learn a lot. And of course you share, but how do you share in a way that's actionable?
Each one of us within the ventures team look into different verticals. So I look, for example, into hospitality and a few others. And that allows us to develop a good relationship with our counterpart in the business unit, typically the head of strategy of the business unit. And we have this recurring touch points with them where one of the objectives is sharing and sharing in the two directions. It's very important to understand what's their strategy, what are their priorities, and especially how can ventures fit into that, because obviously not in all of them. And that makes our lives much easier when looking for investment opportunities and screening startups. And then the other way around, obviously, we use these opportunities with them to share specific investment opportunities, but also these trends that we are observing. And I don't have any secret sauce on how to share it and make it actionable. I would say that and it's a bit more informal and probably less structured than these meetings that we have. But another example of how we try to do it for the broader organization, not only the teams in the business units that we work more closely, is through webinars that we do every quarter at least. The ventures team organizes webinars that are and the company is invited to join, where we share trends, interesting startups that we met, not necessarily startups that fit our investment criteria, but even from an inspiration point of view that we think it's interesting for the organization to know. And lately, we also started inviting CEOs of our portfolio companies or companies that we are engaging with and that we met and we think are relevant to do interviews with them in this webinar. So to give the entrepreneur the opportunity to share with Amadeus what they are doing, what they're looking for, and how that they can add value to Amadeus.
I really like the idea of this webinar, especially it creates more touch points for Amadeus, but also more touch points for your portfolio companies. I want to go back and double click on the observer board seat. And here first, I want to understand if you have the same granularity between the ecosystem type of investments versus new growth opportunity type of investment. And how do you prepare your business group, business units, business lines, people to be on the board? Because it doesn't come without training, I'm sure. So how do you prepare them?
Yes. So in terms of how the different granularity between the two tracks, the board observer, I would say it's the standard that we have in our ecosystem deals and also in our growth deals. While on the ecosystem deals, we typically co-invest with other investors. In the growth deals, we can take the lead role. And so in those situations, we might ask for more than the board observer, but it really depends case by case and how we see it fitting into the overall strategy. And then your question in terms of preparation with the business unit, it requires preparation in terms of the obligations and of a board observer. And so we have typically 1 or 2 meetings with them to explain a bit what's expected, what's the role, and we are in permanent contact with them as part of our portfolio management role as well.
Nice. And maybe from the entrepreneur's point of view, I can see the pros and cons. I can see the pros, which is they have someone who's going to know them and engage with them that actually work for the business unit. But the cons is maybe there's some kind of conflict of interest or maybe some information they wish not to share everything. So how do you manage these maybe concerns from entrepreneurs?
If you would tell me this before I joined the CVC, coming from my financial VC experience, I would definitely see your concern. But this is something that all of the entrepreneurs, they were all very eager to have someone from the business unit joining the board as a board observer. That's actually one of the key values that they would see out of our investment. So I have to be honest, I haven't faced that issue yet.
Which is very nice and counterintuitive. And so what are you looking forward in the next 12 months? First on hospitality, but then maybe wider afterwards for Amadeus Ventures.
Our areas of focus for 2022 are actually applicable to hospitality as well. I would say they're quite transversal across the different business units. The first one of them is sustainability. And this one has been a priority in the past. It's not something new coming into 2022, but it's still a high priority for us at Amadeus and consequently at Amadeus Ventures. If you think about the role of the travel industry and the recovery path, the importance of recovering in a sustainable way. And at Amadeus, we actually have a very structured approach to how we look at sustainability, both at how we incorporate this element in our solutions, but also how we support our customers through their sustainability journey. And Ventures plays quite an active and important role here in this topic. We are involved in the discussions that are happening internally, and our role here is on finding the partners and potential investment opportunities that will help Amadeus achieve these goals. And we're talking about very different areas that can be applicable to hospitality, airlines, and other verticals as well. For example, carbon offsetting or increase operational efficiencies. This is really a focus area for us. And we have been spending quite some time in this space, and it is one of the prios for 2022, for sure.
And so I want to finish with one question, which is about you, Marta. What it is that you are most excited about investing in the next 12 months and why?
It's hard to pick something, not to repeat myself. Sustainability is definitely a very interesting topic. And I had the opportunity to be spending quite some time over the last few months looking into this space and speaking with a few startups. So I definitely foresee that this will be an exciting year in what regards sustainability for Amadeus Ventures. Other areas that I can mention is, this might sound a bit too broad, but everything that will make the traveler journey easier. When I was traveling, there were so many pain points, frictions that could be improved. And if you think about the last 2 years, it didn't get better, right? The number of frictions probably increased due to the pandemic. And so there are lots of opportunities there, and there are several startups addressing different pain points and developing solutions that would help our customers make the journey easier for the end traveler or easing the journey directly for the end travelers. I think that's a very interesting space. I know, very broad, but I think quite excited with what we are seeing.
I'm actually glad you have these two because in a way it nearly feels like a yin and a yang. The less friction to travel, the more travel. I think to have sustainability as part of your investment criteria, as part of your focus areas is really inspiring. So I can say thank you on behalf of everyone, including the travelers, that you're looking into this. And Marta, thank you also for sharing your insights, your personal journey and what you are excited about. And also, I really appreciated this granularity of investments and how you have different investment approval process, depending on what type of investment it is, whether it's more tactical or strategic. And I think that is a golden nugget from today.
Great. Thanks a lot for the invite, Nicola. It has been a pleasure to be able to share with you and the audience a bit more about what we do and what we look for.